Hey, Armand here with your forecast for April 2023. April already. I say that every month, but I mean it every month, so it's okay. Before we get started, I want to make a quick announcement that on Saturday, April 1st, April Fool's Day, we will have a little astrology hangout, and that'll happen at 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time right here on YouTube. Questions and answers. I'll have some stuff prepared, and you can ask questions and maybe I can answer them. I'll answer some of them at least. So that would be a fun thing to do at 11:30 a.m. on Saturday, April 1st. That's 8:30 a.m. if you're on the Pacific time and you are an early riser. It would be 4:30 in the afternoon, London, Dublin, 17:30 Amsterdam. Everybody else can figure it out for themselves. It should be 15:30 Greenwich. Okay, so hope to see you there. It'll be fun. If one person shows up, it'll be a tutorial. If 5 show up, it'll be a seminar. If 20 show up, it'll be a class. If 100 show up, it'll be a movement. It's not going to be a movement, but I was referencing something. If you know what it is that I'm referencing, feel free to put it in the comments. Let's dive into April. Mars has already dived in. He dove into Cancer in late March. And here we have the difference between March and April. March was about shifts, right? Shifts. We had Mars leaving Gemini finally and making his way into Cancer, and we had Pluto making his way into Aquarius for the first time in a couple of hundred years, and we had Saturn diving into Pisces. So we had a lot of these shifts and transitions that went on in March. In April, it's about learning to live with these shifts and transitions as things happen. And indeed, there will be a lot of things happening to these shifts. And yes, it's very, very close to saying shit because there's a lot of stuff that is happening in April. Now, the middle of the month is particularly charged. But before we get there, we've got some pretty interesting stuff happening. In fact, as the month begins, we have more or less basically harmonious aspects as we build up to the Libra full moon. Basically harmonious aspects, yes, but we do have Mercury square to Pluto on the 3rd. Now, Mercury square to Pluto is always this kind of speaking truth to power kind of aspect. Now, we haven't seen this happen. We haven't seen a Mercury aspect to Pluto in Aquarius we've never seen it. In fact, nobody ever saw it when it was happening because Pluto wasn't discovered last time he was in Aquarius. So we've seen lots of Mercury square to Pluto, but we haven't seen it with Pluto in Aquarius. And in this case, Mercury just beginning his travel through Taurus. So it'll be interesting to see how things work out with this square. Basically speaking, we are talking about speaking truth to power. We're talking about, delivering the difficult message. And it is so close to the full moon on the 5th that we might really get to see what's happening in a big way. Now, that full moon in Libra on the 5th, full moons always charge times. In this case, it's a little extra charge because we're going to head into eclipse season. Right after the full moon, as the moon starts waning, things are supposed to be calming down, but we're heading towards an eclipse. More on that in a minute. The thing about this full moon is that in Libra, yes, it should highlight relationships. And actually, relationships get quite a bit of a highlight at the beginning part of the month. But it should do, it's for relationships and that kind of thing. But it gives some perspective. Libra is the sign of perspective. It's, I see things from here, you see them from there. I hear, let's see what we can work out. It's the sign of diplomacy. It's the sign of being able to take the other's perspective. And that's particularly important because the moon is standing away from all of the other planets, which the full moon every month, or actually the moon going through that part of the zodiac, Leo, Virgo, Libra, and on into Scorpio, has been giving us a chance to get some perspective because all the other planets are bundled together. Mars is kind of opening up things a little bit now that he's out in Cancer, but Mars in Cancer has a kind of protective sort of energy. It's about defending the clan. It's about advocating for or fighting for family, the clan, country, that kind of thing. It's a rather protective, somewhat conservative vibe. So is not really opening things up all that much being out there in Cancer. Still in all, I mean, it's a little bit more open than it was back when Pluto was in Capricorn and Mars was in Gemini. Anyway, the full moon shines perspective. And perspective is a good thing. It's a good thing for keeping your head, is to have perspective. The problem is it's a full moon, which is not great for keeping perspective because people get a little too emotional around the full moon. And the other thing worth considering with this is that the moon is coming into the eclipse season. So we're really not going to get that full value of the Libra full moon that we might otherwise hope for. But you know what? We'll have to see what happens. Now, in the first week or so of the month, we do have a lot of relationship energy. Venus, just fresh from her meeting with Uranus at the end of March, goes on to make a nice sextile to Pallas Athene, and then gets herself into Gemini. She leaves her home sign of Taurus and goes into Gemini, which generally speaking indicates that for most of April, we'll be dealing with a little bit lighter, somewhat, some would say flirtatious kind of energy. It's very sociable. It's very neighborhood oriented, probably more group oriented. I mean, I'm sure you can have a great time in personal relationships as well, but it's a little bit more of that sort of flexible kind of thing. Like, let's see what's going on. Let's get out there. And, you know, it's the Friday, it's a happy hour kind of thing if you're at work, or if it's just the kind of meeting up with friends type of thing if you're not. There is, on the other hand, an interesting meeting of Uranus and Juno, which is happening, which it'll echo, for those in partnerships, it'll echo the sort of surprising Uranus-Venus aspect of a few weeks ago. This one, however, is not so much about trying something new, moving into, maybe trying someone new, as Venus Uranus is. It's more about making changes within partnerships. So that's a pretty good energy that you'd want to be aware of, especially if you need to make changes, particularly through the first, let's say, 10, 12 days of the month. And then things start heating up. Venus moves into Gemini. She sextiles Pluto. Should be good. A couple of days later, she sextiles Pluto right on the 11th, and she moves into Gemini because Pluto's still at 0 Aquarius, not sextiles, trines. And then Venus will then go on in a couple of days to square Saturn. It's kind of like things up in the air from the end of March through about mid-April in terms of relationship, and then it becomes a little bit more of a decision time. Although, with Venus in Gemini and Saturn down there in Pisces, which is Venus's favorite sign, I'm not really sure that it's going to come across as being sort of like a hard deadline sort of decision. It's probably more just like an opportunity to make a decision, to solidify things in relationship, or to let things go if you need to let things go. That's the relationship flavor for the month, though. We start out with this sort of flexible, experimental, and then we kind of settle into, at least let's call it a provisional model of the way things are going to be after Uranus meets with Juno, the partnership asteroid, and Venus meets with Saturn, or squares Saturn. On April 11th, the Sun meets with Jupiter. Now, they're in signs that they love. Jupiter is actually in a section of Aries that it's Mars' sign, but Jupiter's got the condo out there in the last 10 degrees. So Jupiter's very happy to be out there. The Sun is, of course, crazy to be in Aries now that he is above the horizon most of the day. This is his favorite sign as well. So we have this real positive energy that's going to just radiate through things. Well, positive energy sometimes comes with a little bit of a price. And in this case, it could be that some egos can get a little too inflated, that the warlike aspects, let's not say belligerent aspects of Aries could get a little inflated. Certainly, this is a time when people who think a lot of themselves are going to let you know about it. And it could be and this is very active kind of thing. This isn't just, blowhard telling you what what you think type of thing. This is very action oriented. So, it's a very positive energy. It is great for all kinds of creative projects. It is good. It's a great time for athletes. Boy, oh boy. But be aware that some folks are not going to handle the energy all that well. And so we might have a little bit of disruptions, eruptions right around the, April 10th to 12th period of time. Now, if things start getting hot right around mid-month, here's an interesting thing. The third week in April, from like mid-month on, from the 14th on, is often a very difficult week in the United States. And not only astrologers know that. That was a point that they were making on the news. Some terrible thing happened. Well, you know how it is. Some terrible thing happened a few years ago, and the commentators was just saying, well, maybe it's because of tax time or something like that. But indeed, it is often a very tense week. And this year, we know why astrologically, and that is because on April 20th, we are having a new moon eclipse in Aries. Now, this is the second new moon of the year in Aries. We had one in March at the very beginning of Aries, and now this one is happening at 29 degrees of Aries. Well, that ought to give you some pause, because 29th degree of any sign gives you the energy of that sign very strongly. This is a real rallying of that energy, and it's martial energy. And Mars is out there in Cancer. So we have this kind of tension pressure cooker. It's a new moon eclipse. We always have the tension pressure cooker sort of energy right around then. It's at the 29th degree of Aries. And the ruler of Aries is out there in Mars, where he's really trying to keep a lid on things, right? So we have a real pressure cooker kind of situation going on with this. So I would be a little bit wary of what goes on. I think most of this is going to play out at the collective level. People will be feeling this tension, though. This is not something that we could really let go of all that easily, or some folks are not going to let go of it all that easily. More than that, at 29 degrees of Aries, the moon, and a day later, less than a day later, the sun, 12 hours later, the sun will go on to square Pluto. So the moon leaves Aries, goes into Taurus, and squares Pluto in Aquarius. And then a few hours later, really, the sun does the same thing. So this eclipse, although it's out of sign, and I'm not big on out of sign aspects, but this time I think we can make an exception. This eclipse at the very charged last degree of Aries is squared to Pluto. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm going to talk about it more when we get to that week. I don't want to I don't want to give you too much to think about in terms of April right now, but I think that the short answer is that those folks who are overinflated around the 11th are going to be a little deflated right around the eclipse, but they're not going to go quietly, if you take my meaning. You want to make it a little bit more. On the 21st, Mercury stations to go retrograde. So not only do we have the tension of the eclipse with Mars in Cancer at the last degree of Aries and square Pluto, we have Mercury stationing to go retrograde, and it's the days right around, like the day or two before and the day or two after the stations, that we get the most dramatic mercurial mishaps. So, all of this action could very well be based upon misinformation or disinformation or just general confusion. There could certainly be a lot of technological issues that show up, but we'll talk more about Mercury's retrograde again a little bit later in the month. But throwing into the mix, we're looking at that period of time starting really around the 14th And moving forward right around the 20th, 21st, I think we have to recognize that there is a lot of very charged energy that could be a little difficult to deal with. I would say that for most of us, it's just going to be hard to work with it. The good news is the second new moon in Aries might very well come across as being a second chance to get a start of the year. I'm always saying that the Aries new moon is the starting point of the year. Well, you get another one. It's like a do-over. If you didn't get the year off to a good start back in March, well, give it a shot now. It could work. It really could work. For the rest of the month, we have more or less harmonious aspects, which is good. We like that. We like harmonious aspects. One of the things that I think is going to come out of this is the ability to use let's say the last week in April to make changes in a planned out kind of step-by-step sort of way. And I would think that that would be a good advice. We come out of the eclipse, and maybe the eclipse has got us a little bit, disturbed. Nah, it's too serious. Maybe the eclipse has us a little edgy. And what we're going to need to do is find ways to use the energy productively. And there's a lot of opportunities for using the energy productively as the month comes to a close. So, harmonious aspects with Mercury and Mars and Saturn, really good stuff, not so difficult. Except that we are standing right before Pluto's station to retrograde, which happens on May 1st. Now, technically, I know that is going to be for next month, but it's really going to be on April 30th, maybe 29th and 30th, that we feel this energy. It almost exactly mirrors the eclipse energy. I mean, a Pluto station is like a solar eclipse, and it's a lot like this solar eclipse, the one that happens on the 20th, because that solar eclipse is square to Pluto. So we're getting a big full dose of this sort of Plutonian energy there. We do have the opportunity to work things out. And in fact, that Plutonian energy could be used very productively. It doesn't suggest a lot of cooperation. It doesn't suggest a lot of look at all the things we can do together. It's a little bit more about what each of us wants to do as individuals. However, maybe I shouldn't say that, because Pluto is in the collective sign of Aquarius now. And maybe it's about us coming to some sort of consensus about what we can do. And that could be at both the eclipse and at the Pluto station and at all that time in between. Maybe it's about all of us coming to a consensus, or, half of us come to this consensus and the other half come to that consensus. That's probably what's going to happen. But it is sort of like this maybe collective shared ideals type of energy. And finally, since it is in the midst of harmonious times, pay attention to the Cancer moon between April 24th and April 26th. Now, this is the first time since 2008 that the Cancer moon will not be opposing Pluto. Back in the old days, in 2008, she got into the sign and was opposed by Pluto. So it's sort of like a slap in the face as soon as she arrived in her home sign. More recently, the slap in the face came at the end of the sign, and that would be, she'd sort of be waiting for it the whole time she was going through the sign. What that did, having Pluto opposite in Capricorn, having opposite Cancer, meant that the Cancer moon was really emphasizing its more protective, clannish side, a little bit less of the open emotions and nurturing side of Cancer. Now, that really ought to be changing now that Pluto is out of the sign. Although, ironically enough, now that Pluto is out of the sign, Mars is in. And so Mars is essentially conveying some of that same Plutonian kind of energy. Still in all, it's not the same thing. It could be a little bit similar, but it's not the same thing. So pay attention to see what happens around that time, and see if the Cancer moon doesn't feel a little bit better this month than it has in previous. Oh, you probably weren't paying attention to it, were you? Well, just pay attention and see how that period of time feels. That ought to be good. Okay, I hope to see you on Saturday, April 1st, unless, of course, you're watching this sometime after April 1st, in which case, we'll see you next time. And we'll see you next time.